Seattle Against Slavery gives an opportunity for people to work on this issue, make an impact, prevent people from being trafficked for both labor and commercial sex. And we do that by walking alongside organizations like WARN, who serve survivors, and even survivors themselves, who directly inform our work to make sure that our community is a place where everyone can have safety and freedom and hope.
And what is your role inside your organization?
As the executive director, essentially, I facilitate the work of all the volunteers. We have a very small staff, and most of the work that's done, whether it's public awareness or education in high schools, campaigns with the Washington State Legislature, that's done by community members who are interested in volunteering, learning what trafficking looks like in our area, and the things that we can do to make sure that people aren't exploited or abused.
Thank you. Celia?
So I work for the Washington Anti-Trafficking Response Network, which is an anti-trafficking program of the International Rescue Committee in Seattle, which is a refugee resettlement agency. We have been working serving survivors of human trafficking for over 10 years. And what we do is we work with local organizations to raise awareness about human trafficking in Washington State, and we also provide services to survivors of human trafficking. We've primarily worked with foreign nationals who have been forced into human trafficking, labor, and sex in Washington State. And we also work with organizations like Roberts to spread awareness and get people to advocate more for the rights of human trafficking survivors.
Thank you. Celia, how would you define human trafficking?
Okay. Simply, human trafficking is the use of force, fraud, or coercion to compel a person into any form of work against his or her will. And when we do trainings, we try and get you to really expand your mind about what work can be, because it can be in the legal sector or it can be in the illegal sector. So, for example, if you have read a lot about unaccompanied minors coming up to the United States, we've worked with a number of unaccompanied youth who have been forced to sell drugs or forced to smuggle. This is a type of work that they have been forced into. But we've also seen work in multiple arenas, such as construction, agriculture, the hotel industry, factories, and others. The list can go on, and domestic servitude, and commercial sex work.
Robert, what are some of the ways we can identify human trafficking?
So the play did a really great job of expressing some of the basic situations that a person could be in, where they would want to leave a situation of work, but there would be a threat of violence or some sort of consequences for themselves or others. And when someone is in those situations, there are pretty natural responses that people might notice. If someone's confined to an area, as we saw the people in the play actually not being allowed to leave the hotel rooms or the places that they were staying. If someone appears to be under threat of violence, so that might be, you know, when you're out in a business in the community and someone actually appears afraid of their boss, you know, someone raises a voice and a person looks like they're afraid that violence might happen to them. That's not a normal everyday thing that should be happening in a nail salon or a restaurant, and so that might be something that piques you know, sort of your spidey sense that there might be something that is awry. Now, these things might not necessarily be human trafficking. As Celia said, it's when someone's compelled into work for the gain and the benefit of a trafficker. It might simply be a situation of abuse or violence. It might be a situation where someone is being exploited in other ways that are not commercial in nature. But all of these things have some signs that I think when people are out in the community and they notice things that might be a sign of domestic violence or a sign of some other type of criminal activity, a sign of child abuse. These things could be connected to trafficking situations, or they could be connected to another type of violence, and it's incumbent upon all of us that we know that we have a role to play in helping people have opportunities and resources to get out of those situations and connect with organizations like WARN.
What have you, the two of you in your work, found, and the work that others have done, to be some of the root causes for human trafficking, some situations where victims are likely to be entrapped in that way?
Yeah, I actually think that the musical did a really good job of showing a lot of different vulnerabilities that may occur in someone's life that can then lead to them becoming victims of human trafficking. a lot of what we find is that, and this is not something that's their fault in any way, shape, or form, but a lot of times we find that people are poor, they have less economic opportunity, or, for example, the fact that Efwa's father's, the cotton prices became lowered, the fact that they are not able to make the same amount of money that they were before. These different situational factors can really affect someone to take a job in another city or be enticed by an opportunity in another place. We've worked with both women and men, children, and we see that a lot of times people that are survivors have been discriminated against based on their ethnicity, discriminated against based on their sexuality, discriminated against based on their religion. It's a lot of times people that are vulnerable in a variety of different ways that then lead them to go into situations that are not as safe as they could be.
And I would say another one of the pieces that the play really exemplified is that trafficking is happening because there is a market out there for the exploitation of other people. The character Caesar, who was exploiting other people, he characterized very clearly that he had had violence happen upon him and desperation happen upon him and his family, and he was now visiting that violence upon other people. That was a choice that he was making. Those men who were buying sex from trafficking victims, that was a market for Caesar to do that violence, to make money off of the exploitation. And even though he got his comeuppance at the end and had bad things happen to him, those other people who were attacking him, they bear just as much responsibility for the exploitation and violence happening to the main characters as he did. This connects to things in our lives all the time. We had sort of an interesting conversation right when we were coming in because we were going to buy snacks. And Celia pointed out that there's none of the candies were things that I can buy because they're not fair trade certified. And most folks might not know, but Ghana in West Africa, where the play is based, is one of the places where more than half of the cocoa in the world comes from. And it also is rampant with child slavery in the cocoa industry. That this situation of someone being married off or having an economic opportunity that turns into sex trafficking could have just as easily been one of these children being promised to go to school or have a job, and instead they're out in the cocoa plantations being forced with the same type of violence, same type of threats to them and their family. And then for all of us, when we go to buy our candy, we might not think about that. Just like those men who are buying that sex, they might blame the person in that situation. They might not care, as Efwa was trying to bring up her own humanity and the guy just wasn't hearing it like she wasn't a human being. In the same way, the people who are driving this industry bear some of the responsibility for that. And it also creates an opportunity, because when we see other people's humanity and we don't act in ways that can bring violence to them, we can cut the motivation out of trafficking. If there's no money to be made off of this, people aren't just going to be exploiting other people for no good reason. It's a crime because someone benefits.
It's interesting that you, it's interesting to think about what fair trade actually means. I feel like fair trade in a lot of circumstances has sort of been like lumped in with organic, right? Something is organic and it's fair trade and it's, and that we don't actually think about what the other side of the consequences of something not being, of what unfair trade is. Does it seem like there has been a spike in the market for trafficking? Or do you think, I'm asking them a question that was not planned, or does it seem like it's something we're just becoming more aware of, or is there any way to tell?
I'm not sure there's a way to tell. Honestly, human trafficking is one of the worst for trying to find realistic statistics because we don't know how large the situation is, and because it's such a hidden crime that there's no base to measure it on. So for example, Washington State gets a lot of press that we have some of the highest human trafficking in the United States, but that's probably not true. We do know, though, that we have a really robust human trafficking task force, and so because of that, we have agencies, we have the SPD, we have numerous different people looking for human trafficking, and so because of that, we have higher numbers, but we don't know what that number is in relation to. You know, the International Labor Organization is basically the only organization that WARN uses to give a base number of how many people are affected by human trafficking in the world, and they estimate that at around 21 million people, and that was an estimate from 2012. So
I will
That
say,
is a really high number. 21 million people?
worldwide.
yeah.
Wow.
So the interesting thing about these numbers is that represents probably the largest estimate of people in slavery, in forced labor ever in human history, but it's also because we have the most people ever in human history, so it may also be the smallest percentage of people who are in slavery or forced labor. But if we think about what human trafficking describes, the circumstances, and then think if that's something new. Immigrant laborers being exploited or abused or being threatened with deportation or violence. No, that's completely not new. People in a situation of commercial sex or prostitution fearing violence from a pimp. That's sort of synonymous with how prostitution has worked for centuries. Even when I watch Game of Thrones, even when they represent it in fantasy worlds, there's still a violent person keeping someone in that situation if they want to leave. And we see, in the back rooms of restaurants, in nail salons, in, people's homes where there are nannies or housekeepers that might be from another country and might not see the language. We see all the time that there are people in vulnerable situations who are being exploited. Now, just for the past 15 or 16 years, we have a name for it, and it's human trafficking. But this type of exploitation has gone on for a long time. It's interesting that you drew the connection with organic as well, because organic food used to never be a thing that was called organic. People just called it food. If there was a cow that ate grass and then made milk, you didn't have to call it something, it was just milk. But at the same time, what we've seen is with the power of campaigns and labeling and global trade, we now need names for things that are safe, things that we know don't abuse people or exploit people, even things that are healthy for us because they won't have all sorts of bad stuff in it. That represents a set of challenges, but it also represents an opportunity because we can now figure out, maybe for the first time, what things take care of the workers and keep their communities safe and make sure that their kids have education. And that's really what fair trade ends up meaning, not just that it's a label that sort of adds another $2 to the chocolate bar that you buy, although that is also true. But it certainly is also a sign that for those human beings at the other end of making your chocolate or your bananas or your tomatoes, that it's worth the cost of them having a better life.
Thank you. I would love to open it up to you all and see if you have any questions that you would like to ask. Yes, ma'am.
Right, so actually, Warren, while we have expertise in serving survivors that are foreign-born, we also serve survivors that are U.S. citizens and work with other organizations who also serve survivors who are U.S. citizens as well.
And I would say that the examples that I was giving around nail salons and restaurants and people being trafficked in homes, that's here that I was talking about. Those are survivors that Warren is serving here that we're doing education on. And teenage boys and girls who are in commercial sex, trans youth, adults who are being forced or coerced into prostitution. Those are things that are happening in our area all the time, and we certainly see those same opportunities for community education that will keep people from being exploited and that will keep people from being abused. Because someone is growing up here to be the person who says, I deserve a housekeeper even if they don't want to live in my house and I have to threaten them. Someone is raising kids in our community to think, if I have to sell someone for sex and use violence to sell them for sex, that's a decision that I need to make. And other people are out there in the community saying, I'm going to buy a stranger for sex even if I don't know if they want to be there or not. Yeah, this is the type of education that we do in the community, and Warren has been doing this work since 2005, and it sort of gained a lot more steam and attention and notoriety in the past few years focused on sex trafficking, but certainly we're seeing just as much, if not more, labor trafficking as well, having people in our community who are vulnerable because of their race, because of their background. So it's great that you are engaging this issue. I would also say there's lots of help that's always needed from people in the community, whether it's, you know, volunteering or fundraising or political influence that you might have. And even in towns like Issaquah, the decisions your city council makes about how law enforcement resources are used could keep people safe from trafficking. The decisions that they make about how they fund organizations like Friends of Youth, who serve youth survivors of commercial sexual exploitation, that makes a big difference in people's ability to get out of a trafficking situation. So thanks for engaging on that issue.
Other thoughts or questions? Yes, ma'am. Her question was,
Yeah.
what happens to the children that they are able to rescue?
So Warren actually comes from the standpoint that we don't rescue anyone. The police rescue people. But when someone has come out of their trafficking situation and asks for help, then there are services that they are legally entitled to. So no matter if they are U.S. citizens or if they're foreign-born. A foreign national has the right to safety and privacy and the ability to live free on their own. If they have come here, even if they've come here illegally, they have the ability to apply for immigration status based on having been a victim of human trafficking. That's if they choose to do that or not. They also have the ability to either be reunified with their family here in the United States or the ability to go back home. There are a number of rights based on the Trafficking Victims Protection Act that was started in 2003. 2000. Sorry, there's been a lot of reauthorizations. And so they have a number of services they're entitled to here in the United States. And do you want to talk about U.S. citizen services?
Sure. I'll say connected to that, I'll do a broad scope Warren services. Warren is this incredible organization, so I just get excited to talk about them. But they connect people with housing, a place to live, education, if that's something that they need, medical services, legal representation, which is often very important and useful. But I will say, and a number of other wraparound services, I will say that there's not one dedicated bed, shelter bed, housing bed for human trafficking victims in Washington State broadly. So if you're a labor trafficking victim, no dedicated place for you to go. If you're a youth sex trafficking victim, in King County there are 12, but there's the need for hundreds potentially of places for people to go statewide. If you're a youth and you're a boy or a trans youth, there's really no dedicated places for you. If you're an adult man who's being exploited for commercial sex, which is a thing that exists as well, there's no dedicated place for you. So there's very limited resources. The folks at Warren still somehow find a way to place people, to give them a place to go and safety and opportunities for their future, and give them a lot of choices that, you know, in their trafficking situations have been taken away. And so the organization that is connected with the East Side here, Friends of Youth, serves youth survivors. Youth Care is one of the members of the Warren team as well, Auburn Youth Resources. There are a number of different things focused on sex trafficking, but Warren is really the single point of contact for labor trafficking survivors and many adults who are going through trafficking situations.
And as we know, housing is a really big issue. Coming from being within a refugee resettlement agency, housing is also a really big issue because we've worked to resettle refugees in the Seattle area and outside, and as you know, the housing market is going exponentially through the roof. It is even harder for trafficking victims who have no legal status here at the moment, because trying to get housing for someone without any type of identification is incredibly, incredibly hard. We do find it, but you know, they're not always the best housing situations. on the market.
Other questions?
So yeah, I can speak to that. So the question is about the Not on Our Watch campaign, which was done by Stolen Youth. That's the organization. If any of those folks are here, you're great. All transparency, Stolen Youth funds our high school education program, so that's one of the reasons why they're so great. The funding initially for the first Stolen Youth effort was to ensure the Youth Care Bridge Collaborative remained operational, which was a housing program that also had advocates that would work with youth. Interesting thing, and this is sort of part of the learning process that happens with doing this type of work, because it's relatively new work. There are a number of youth who are getting out of trafficking situations who, who didn't want to live all together or be in some sort of like confined housing and education program or counseling program. And so part of the bridge model has actually shifted to doing community advocate services as well. And Friends of Youth is one of the groups that does that. So there might be someone in the community who says, I have a place to live. That's not something I need you to take care of for me, but I don't have a job and I need to get that. I missed a bunch of school and I need to get back into that situation. I need mental health counseling. And that community advocate can go out to where they are, meet in places like Starbucks and McDonald's and things like that, and provide them the type of counseling and connecting them with services that don't require them to just be in that housing situation. So Stolen Youth has actually helped support the organizations doing this work to provide both the community support and the dedicated housing if that's something that's needed. And their support through Not on My Watch has also helped make those 12 beds available that I mentioned earlier. Yeah, great question.
I think it's really important to remember that when someone is a victim of human trafficking, during their human trafficking situation, they have not had any type of self-determination. So when they're able to escape their situation or have been rescued out of their situation, it's really important to let them choose the services that they need, even if they are children. So as opposed to putting them in a facility or having them live in an area that they feel safe and then having a community advocate come to them and ask them what do they need. Those are the types of services that Warren feels are really important because you're allowing them to finally make a choice. Whereas during their experience, they did not have a choice over what was going on.
What are some things that we can do other than be overwhelmed? You know, like what are some action items that we can do in our lives?
What Robert said about what you buy, that's something you can do every day. It can be depressing. For example, I don't eat peanut M&Ms anymore, and they're delicious, but unfortunately that company uses child slave labor and has not chosen to stop. They said they've given themselves the timeline until 2020 to stop. There are organizations, though, like freetowork.org, which will rate different companies and in different venues. So the apparel industry, coffee, chocolate, electronics, you can see how different companies are rated based on their labor rights and their supply chain. There's also this incredible organization that was started by migrants in Immokalee, Florida, called the Coalition of Immokalee Workers, and they have done an incredible job campaigning around the Fair Food Program. In Immokalee, a lot of migrant workers pick tomatoes, and before the Fair Food Program, they were being paid a penny per pound for picking these tomatoes. And through the Fair Food Program and through their campaigning and protests, the Fair Food Program now gives them 2 pennies per pound of tomatoes, but that effectively turns their salary from $13,000 a year to $26,000 a year. And they have done an incredible job of getting huge companies and fast food chains to sign on to the Fair Food Program. And so many of them have, like McDonald's and Taco Bell, Burger King, et cetera. And the one company that has not chosen to sign on is Wendy's. And in fact, we saw in the last week that Wendy's chose, instead of supporting tomato farms in Florida, they have chosen to start supporting a company in Mexico that in 2013 was charged with enslaving 275 people on their tomato farms. So you can make choices really easily about what you choose to support just through your paycheck.
I would also say, and maybe I just say this because I'm an executive director and I have a board of directors as well who encourage me to say things like this. If you want to give in the community, Warren has a tremendous opportunity to give directly to survivors, people who have been through situations like what you saw in this play. There are gift card programs to give people who are coming out of a trafficking situation the opportunity to buy things for themselves, go grocery shopping for themselves, buy clothing that they pick out themselves so they don't have to receive handouts or not have the things that they need for regular life. That's an amazing program. And I would also say Seattle Against Slavery's work, if you want to support what we do, it's very straightforward to give to us. And doing the education that keeps the next generation from exploiting other people and abusing them and not being responsible for people in their community, we can change those attitudes and we can stop that work. So there are a lot of different ways to do it, and if you want to get involved before you decide that you're going to give or before you decide that you're going to change the way that you buy things, we take volunteers. And as long as you can use the internet, you can find us somewhere. If you type human trafficking in Seattle or human trafficking King County, it'll be Warren and Seattle Against Slavery that are going to come up at the top of the list. And if you wanted to find us on social media as well, if you're big Facebook fans, we both have great Facebook pages that you can learn more about the type of work that's going on in our community. And it's really making a difference. People are getting out of trafficking situations every day. They're finding ways towards hope and freedom and rebuilding their lives. Tremendously brave, courageous people are stepping out of dangerous situations and helping other people as well. And it's inspiring, but we need all the community's support to make all this work possible.
Thank you. Well, thank you both so much for coming and sharing your wisdom and your knowledge with us. Thank you guys for coming and sticking around and listening and learning a little bit more. All of these talkbacks are going to be put on the Village Theater website if you want to go back and listen to it again or point friends or colleagues into the direction of the talkbacks. There's also a schedule for the remaining talkbacks that are going to be of a variety of topics, and that's online as well, in addition to some follow-up information about what to do and where to go in terms of helping. So thank you very much.
Thank you.